I almost did not go. That part still feels important when I look back on it because if I had listened to the version of myself I trusted then, I would have stayed in my car, gone home, and called it common sense. At the time, I was 32, living alone in Chicago, and working as a project coordinator at Sterling Creative Group. We were a small marketing firm, the kind of office where everybody knew when somebody had a dentist appointment and somehow also knew what was said in the waiting room. It was good work. Busy work. The kind that could fill every empty corner of your life if you let it. And I let it. 9 months earlier, my girlfriend Anna had left me after telling me something I could not argue with. She said loving someone who was always half there was tiring. She said I sat in the room with her, but my mind was always somewhere else, usually at work. I remember thinking I should have felt heartbroken. Instead, I felt relieved. That scared me more than the breakup, so I made a quiet rule for myself. No dating. No trying. No letting my personal life tangle up with my job. I would keep my head down and do good work, and that would be enough. Then Margaret Wells decided it was time to interfere. Margaret was our CEO. She had built Sterling from one tiny rented office into a real company with real clients and a reputation people respected. She was smart, sharp, and so observant it could make you nervous. She remembered deadlines, coffee orders, family names, and apparently the fact that I had been single long enough for her to form an opinion about it. It started with small questions in passing. "What are you doing this weekend, Ethan? Seeing anyone these days?" I answered vaguely and hoped she would lose interest. She did not. One afternoon in the break room, she mentioned her daughter had moved back to Chicago after a few years on the East Coast. She said her daughter was 29, worked in environmental policy, and was too focused on work to remember the rest of life existed. I said, "That sounds familiar," and Margaret gave me a look that should have warned me. Over the next 2 weeks, she kept bringing her up. Her daughter liked hiking, hated small talk, had strong opinions about coffee, had been through a hard breakup and had kept to herself since. I never clearly agreed to anything, but somehow Margaret spoke as if we were already in the planning stage of a merger. Then she showed me a photo, a candid shot. Her daughter standing outside somewhere, laughing at something off camera, blonde hair loose around her shoulders. No pose, no performance, just a real moment. I made the mistake of saying, "She seems interesting." Margaret smiled like she had been waiting for exactly those words. A few days later, she passed my desk and said almost casually, "By the way, Jade has your number now." That evening, Jade texted me. Short, direct, no small talk. She said her mother had been impossible about this and she was free Friday if I wanted to get it over with. I stared at the message for a long time, then typed back, "Friday works." By the time Friday came, I'd already spent the whole week pretending it was just dinner. And there I was, sitting in my car outside Bianchi's, watching the clock, trying to convince myself to walk inside. Bianchi's was the kind of place that made a first meeting feel like a celebration you had not earned yet. Dim lights, white tablecloths, candles on every table. Soft music low enough that you could ignore it, but not low enough to forget it was there. I remember thinking Margaret had probably picked it because no one trying to keep things casual chooses a restaurant where the bread arrives in a basket lined with cloth. I got there early and still felt late somehow. The host led me to a booth in the back corner. I ordered water, opened the menu, and read the same line 3 times without understanding a word. At exactly 7, I heard the front door open. I kept my eyes down for a second longer than I needed to. When I finally looked up, she was already crossing the room. Jade moved like someone who did not waste motion. She was not trying to draw attention, but people noticed her anyway. Dark jacket, simple top, hair loose around her shoulders. She scanned the room once, spotted me, and came straight over. She set her bag down, slid into the booth across from me and said, "You're Ethan?" I said yes. Then she glanced at the menu and said, "My mom wouldn't let this go until you agreed, right?" I let out a breath I did not realize I was holding. "Something like that." She nodded. "Same." We sat there for a moment in a kind of silence that felt surprisingly easy. Not awkward, just honest. 2 people recognizing the other one had also shown up mostly out of obligation. Then she looked up at me and said, "I'm going to be straightforward. I'm here because saying no to my mother is exhausting, but I'm not here to waste your time. So let's just be honest tonight and see what happens." I looked at her and said, "That sounds like the best plan I've heard all week." That earned me the smallest almost smile, Before the waiter even came back, we made a deal. 1 hour, eat dinner, be decent to each other, then go home and tell Margaret we gave it a fair try and there just wasn't a spark. Jade held out her hand across the table when she said it, and I shook it like we were agreeing on contract terms. It should have stayed that simple. It did not. The deal started to fall apart somewhere between the bread basket and the appetizers. Not in one big moment. More like something slowly loosening. We stopped choosing careful answers and started saying what we actually meant. She told me about her work in environmental policy, how much of it involved pushing companies to honor promises they liked making in public and avoiding in private. She talked about long reports, stubborn executives, and months of work that often ended with someone else acting surprised the problem had existed at all. She did not tell the story to impress me. She just told the truth. That was what made it impressive. By then I had stopped checking the time. When she finished telling me about one company she had pushed for months, I told her a story from work. A retail client was losing customers fast, and almost everyone in the room had decided the account was not worth saving. I disagreed. I rebuilt the content strategy from the ground up, stayed late for weeks, and watched the campaign turn around. Their engagement climbed. The client stayed. In the final meeting, Margaret took most of the credit. I smiled and let it happen. Jade listened without interrupting. Then she set her fork down and asked, "Why didn't you say anything?" I gave the answer I'd been giving myself for years. It wasn't worth the trouble. She tilted her head and looked at me in a way that made me feel more seen than I was ready for. "I don't think that's true," she said. "I think you decided staying quiet felt safer." It was not said cruelly, just plainly. That was the part that got me. People had told me to speak up before. Friends, co-workers, Anna, in different words. But Jade said it in a way that made it sound less like advice and more like a fact I had been walking around with in my pocket, pretending not to feel. I looked at her and said, "You might be right." She picked up her glass. "I usually am." I laughed then, a real laugh, not a polite one. She smiled back, and this time it was not almost. Something changed after that. The hour we had agreed on came and went without either of us mentioning it. Plates were cleared. Water glasses were refilled. The waiter asked if we wanted dessert, and we said yes, like there had never been a question. We talked about Chicago winters and whether they build character or just make people mean. We talked about how strange your early 30s can feel, when everyone asks about your 5-year plan like your life should fit on a slide deck. We disagreed about small things and stayed curious anyway. By the time we stepped outside, the air had turned colder and the street had gone quiet. We stood near our cars, not leaving. Jade tucked her hands into her jacket pockets and said, "So, this was not terrible." I smiled. "No, it really wasn't." She looked at me for a second, then said, "What do we tell my mom?" I thought about the easy answer, the simple one we had planned at the start. Instead, I said, "The truth. We had a good time, and maybe we see what happens next." She held my gaze, then nodded once. "That works." Monday morning, I walked into the office with coffee in my hand and the feeling that everyone could somehow see I had a secret. They could not, of course. People were asking about client notes and deadlines, not my Friday night. Still, when Margaret waved me into her office before I even reached my desk, I felt 16 for a second. She folded her hands on the desk and looked at me with a calm face that did not fool me at all. "Well?" she asked. I kept it simple. I told her we had a good time. I told her Jade was thoughtful, smart, and easy to talk to. I said we had not made any big plans, but we were probably going to see each other again. Margaret smiled in that quiet way people do when they already know the answer. Jade said the same, she said. Then she added, "Don't wait too long. She does not let people in easily." It sounded like advice, but there was weight under it. The rest of the workday passed in pieces. Meetings, emails, a client call. I did everything I was supposed to do, but my mind kept drifting back to Friday night, and not even to the obvious parts. I kept thinking about the way Jade had named something in me I had spent years excusing. That evening, I stared at my phone longer than I care to admit. I typed one message, erased it, typed another, erased that too. Finally, I sent something plain. "Hey, it's Ethan. I survived the Monday debrief." Her reply came 8 minutes later. "Same. My mom called before I got to work." I laughed out loud in my apartment. I wrote back, "Should we get coffee sometime so we have a second story ready when she asks?" A minute later, she sent, "Thursday." "Thursday works," I said. She answered with a thumbs up, same as before, and that should have felt ordinary. Two people setting a date for coffee, nothing dramatic, nothing to read too much into. But after 9 months of telling myself I was better off in the quiet, that one short exchange made my apartment feel less like peace and more like waiting. Thursday was only 3 days away. It felt like a long time. Thursday coffee turned into 2.5 hours by the water. Then it was dinners that ran late, weekend walks along the lake, and small habits learned without trying. Jade took her coffee black with 1 sugar. I checked my email when I was anxious, even when I knew nothing new was there. We never rushed to name what we were. We just kept showing up. 3 months passed that way. Then one Tuesday afternoon, she called and said, "I need to tell you something, and I didn't want to do it over text." The way she said it made me stop what I was doing and listen. Her ex had called. Connor. They had been together for years before she moved on, and now he was coming back to Chicago. He wanted to meet and talk. She had not answered him yet. She said she was telling me first. I asked what she wanted to do. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she did not know. She said 3 years was a long time, and she did not think she could ignore that history without at least one honest conversation. I told her I understood. I meant it. That did not make it easy. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time with my phone in my hand and no idea what to do with it. I kept wondering if we had been too careful, if leaving things unnamed had protected something or just left too much room for doubt. At work, I was fine in all the ways people can see. Deadlines met, meetings covered, emails answered. Margaret noticed anyway. Late Thursday, after most of the office had cleared out, she sat across from me and said, "You don't have to tell me what's wrong, but you also don't have to pretend it's nothing." So I told her enough. She listened, then said, "Jade has been guarding herself for a long time. Give her room to figure it out, but don't disappear. If you disappear, it will only confirm what she's afraid of." Give her room, don't disappear. It sounded simple until I had to live it. That night I sent Jade one message. "I'm not going anywhere. Take whatever time you need." Then I put my phone face down on the counter and waited in a silence that felt very different from the one I used to choose. She did not reply that night, or the next day. Days passed, then a full week. I went to work. I went to the gym early because I needed somewhere to put the restlessness. I cooked meals and barely tasted them. My friend Derek came over one Saturday with takeout and talked about everything except Jade, which was exactly what I needed. Work helped. A new campaign needed more attention than anyone expected, and I let it pull me in. By the end of the second week, I was proud of what we had built. It surprised me a little, realizing I could still care about my work without using it as a place to hide. Then, 11 days after her call, my phone lit up on a Wednesday evening. "Jade, can we meet waterfront Friday at 7? I replied yes before I finished reading the message. Friday moved slowly, then all at once. I got there early and stood near the railing, the wind coming off the lake cold enough to make my eyes water. I watched the lights across the water and tried to breathe normally. When I heard her footsteps, I turned. She looked tired, not sleepy, worn down, like someone who had been carrying the same thought around for too long. She stopped a few feet away and said, "I saw him." I nodded. I figured. She told me they had met twice. She said he was sorry, and she believed he meant it. Part of her needed to hear that. But while she sat across from him, she kept thinking about someone else. She took a step closer. "You," she said. I did not speak. I just let her keep going. She said she was not confused anymore. She knew why things with Connor had ended, and she knew what she had been building with me, even without a name for it. Then she looked at me with that same clear steadiness she had the first night at Bianchi's and said, "I don't want to be so careful that I protect myself out of something good." By then she was close enough for me to see her trying to hold her voice steady. "I'm ready to stop being scared," she said, "if you're still here." I reached for her hand. "I told you," I said. "I'm not going anywhere." She let out a breath like she had been holding it for days, and we stood there in the cold, side by side, with the wind coming off the lake and no reason left to pretend we were waiting for anything. About 6 months after that night by the water, Jade asked me to move in with her while we were washing dishes. She said it the way she says most important things, like she was talking about the weather. "You should just live here," she said, handing me a plate. "It would be easier." I looked at her and asked, "Is that a proposal or a logistics note?" She laughed and threw the dish towel at me. "Both." We found an apartment on the north side a few weeks later. third floor, big windows, old trees outside, a small balcony that caught the late afternoon light. It needed work, but Jade said good bones matter more than perfect paint, and I learned she was right about that too. Living together taught us the things dating cannot. She wakes up fully awake, already moving. I go quiet when I'm stressed and need a few minutes before I can talk. She gets quiet when she's overwhelmed, and I learned not to crowd her when what she needs is space and trust. We did have one real fight, the kind with raised voices and a door shut too hard. I had started staying late at work again, taking on too much, slipping back into old habits. Jade told me she did not want to live with someone who was only half present. The words hit hard because I had heard something like them before, years earlier. And I went silent. She noticed right away. That night, we sat at the kitchen table and talked for hours. Not to win, not to defend ourselves, just to tell the truth. By the end of it, I promised to stop calling distance responsibility, and she told me she was no longer afraid of what this was becoming. A year and 3 months after our blind date, I took her back to the same waterfront railing and asked her to marry me. She said yes before I even finished breathing. Later, my phone buzzed. Margaret had somehow already found out. Her message welcomed me to the family and informed us Sunday dinner was not optional. Jade read it, shook her head, and laughed. Then she leaned into me, looking out at the water, and said she was glad she had not canceled that first dinner. So was I. If this moment felt familiar to your own heart, stay a while with us. There's always another quiet story waiting in. Stories from the heart.